Okay, before you can go into detail about the role of the heart and its different mechanisms and how it does things, you need to become familiar with the different parts of the heart. So you'll have done something like this before. You'll be used to seeing a 2D image like this at GCSE. So the first thing to take from this is how you look at the heart. You look at it as if it's somebody's actual heart. So if you were to look at somebody face on, that is their left-hand side of their heart, and that's their right-hand side. And the left-hand side carries oxygenated blood. So it's carrying blood which has just come from the lungs, which has collected fresh oxygen, and it's about to be pumped to the rest of the body. Whereas the right-hand side is collecting blood that's come from the body, and it's going to get sent to the lungs. So let's look at the different parts. So you've got 4 chambers. You've got the right atrium, the left atrium, the right ventricle, and left ventricle. That's quite easy. It's the same thing, just left and right. Blood enters the left and right atria at the same time. So this has come from the body, and this blood has just come from the lungs. So this one is fresh with oxygen, and this side is depleted of oxygen. When they get into the atria, they fill up, and eventually the 2 atria, the heart is a big muscle, the top half of the heart, the 2 atria, they will contract, the walls will contract, and they will force blood into the ventricles. And they're being pushed through these 2 openings here. There's one here, and there's one here. These are called, I'm just going to write just the letters, the atrioventricular valves, because they're found between the atria and the ventricles. And in more detail, this one is known as the tricuspid because it's got 3 valves, and this is known as the bicuspid because it's got 2 valves. Once the blood fills up in the ventricles now contract. The walls, these muscular walls, they contract, they cause the volume of the ventricles to get smaller, forcing blood up into these arteries here, which I'll talk about in a minute. Now you might be wondering, why isn't blood being forced back into the atria? Well, it can't, because as soon as it pushes against these valves slam shut. They only open one way, so it forces a one-way system. All right, so let's look at the right-hand side. What artery is this? Well, this is going to the lungs. So the artery associated with the lungs is called the pulmonary pulmonary artery. And this is your other artery. It's called the aorta. So the pulmonary artery, anything to do with pulmonary is lungs. It's pumping blood to the lungs, and that blood, when it gets to the lungs, it's going to collect a new batch of oxygen. It's going to diffuse into the blood, and then once it's done that, it's going to make its way through the veins back this way. So this is the vein that's connected to the lungs, and this is called the pulmonary vein, just like P vein. So the pulmonary artery is sending blood away from the heart to the lungs, and the pulmonary vein is carrying blood to the heart from the lungs. Veins always carry blood to the heart, and arteries always carry blood away from the heart. So this vein here, it's probably one you might even have heard of before. It's called the vena cava. So we've mentioned 4 chambers, right and left atrium, right and left ventricles. The different valves, we've got the atrioventricular valves found between the atria and the ventricles. We've got some other valves here as well, which are found leaving the heart. They're both called the semilunar valves. There's one here, there's one here. Just type it, it might be easier. Semilunar valve. Right. So then at A level, you might find that some of the images are in 3D, but don't let that put you off, because it's just showing all the same stuff as well. You can see our right atrium, left atrium, right ventricle, left ventricle. There's our atrioventricular valve here. There's the other atrioventricular valve. You can see the direction of the blood going from the atria down into the ventricles. This is doing the same here. And the blood is moving up through these valves here called the semilunar valves. So this one here, and this here, they are the same as these ones here. Same thing. So the right ventricle is forcing blood out of the heart to the pulmonary artery, and you can see the pulmonary artery is branching off this way, it's branching off this way, and that's no surprise really, because it's going to the left lung and the right lung. The blood from the left ventricle has been forced out again to the semilunar valve into the biggest artery in the body called the aorta. It's having to deal with really high pressures. Okay, so a good little exercise you should try and do, and I'm sure you'll do a much better job than me, is to try and just draw the heart and label it as you can. So this is me drawing. I'm not trying to get any art qualifications out of this. I'm just going to draw a really bog standard shape. As long as I put things in roughly the right place, that'll do. Okay. So I'm drawing a line right down the middle because I know that there's a left and there's a right hand side. These two openings here, these represent veins coming in. They're bringing the blood in. So this is my pulmonary vein, and this is my vena cava. So now I'll draw the atria now. It's got its little atrioventricular valve. So another atrioventricular valve. So there's my left atrium and my right atrium. Atrioventricular valve, and the side that's on the right hand side is also known as the tricuspid valve. This is also atrioventricular, or we can call it the bicuspid valve. Blood is entering through the pulmonary vein into the atrioventricular valve. Same with this side. And now we're in the ventricles. So there's my right ventricle and left ventricle. And now I just need to draw my semilunar valves. Oh, don't freeze them in now. Nice, there we go. It's easier when we use a piece of paper. Right. So the left-hand side blood is being pushed out now. Blood's being pushed out the right hand side. And the artery which takes blood away from the left hand side is called the aorta. And this is taking it to the body. And the right hand side is taking blood away from the heart to the lungs. And we call this one the pulmonary artery. Arteries always take blood away from the heart. So yeah, pretty ugly picture, but that helps me to familiarise myself with the different parts of the heart, and this is something I really recommend you try doing as well. Right, last thing to talk about is the external part of the heart, and we need to be aware. The main thing you'll be learning about are these blood vessels here, one there, and there as well. And you've probably heard these before. These are called the coronary arteries, and these are the blood vessels responsible for supplying the blood, so supplying the heart itself with blood. Although the heart, its job is to pump blood, it doesn't actually get to access the blood that's in the artery, in the aortas, in the atria and the ventricles. It needs to have its own blood vessel supply to get oxygen to every single cell that makes up the heart. We call the major blood vessels that are bringing that blood to them, they're called the coronary arteries. And you might have heard of coronary artery disease or coronary heart disease. That's when these start to get blockages. It could be from high cholesterol. And if there's blockages, then blood can't get down to the lower parts of the heart, and this can cause a heart attack. So this is something you'll be learning about as well. All right, so that's just intro to the heart. I really recommend that you try and draw something like this, but I'm sure you'll do a better job.